So I'm going to get straight to the agenda because I want to start talking about this. Uh, so we're going to do this a little bit differently than we've probably done before. I like to make sure my presentations are a little bit entertaining. I think that we've had enough of this interesting entertaining when it comes to is this actually going to happen? But now we're going to actually get to the science and the research. A little breakdown of the agenda. I'm going to do a kind of funnel method. I'm going to explain kind of in full what this whole inner behavior intervention thing is. And then we're going to get more specific, and then all the way down to working with anxious learners and helping them with their anxious thoughts and feelings. Now, one of the things that I like to share is my paper that I just had published. This is basically a literature review talking about a whole bunch of presentations that is was on inner behavior and shows us how effective it is. You could use that QR code to access it. I made it so that it's free to download, free to read. It is incredible how expensive it is to make your own research free to access. I cannot stress that enough. So I had to make sure that it was free to access, and I'm happy it is. Um, Now we're gonna get into this little story. Anytime I have a QR code on the side with this little chart, just know that that's a QR code to a video I made of me actually talking about this study. This study is super interesting, and it gets into what we're gonna call this thing called inner behavior. And I'll blow this image up soon, but I just want to talk about it. This is from a study called from 1999 called "Can This Marriage Be Saved?" And this guy called Cooper, he was experiencing frequent negative and destructive thoughts about his wife, children, and mother-in-law, which he felt were threatening his marriage. Now, these are thoughts and feelings that he had that he did not want. So he figured he was going to do something about reducing these problematic, destructive thoughts. He decided to use an inner behavior intervention to self-manage these destructive inner thoughts and replace them with more positive and loving ones. So for 1 month, he simply counted and charted his destructive and loving thoughts daily, but he saw no improvement just by counting the number of times these thoughts occurred. Then immediately after start, he began a daily intervention of accounting where he counted all loving thoughts he could generate about his family in 1 month. So he would think, I love my wife, I love my son, I love working with them, I love taking them out, I love driving them to their football games and whatever. Immediately after starting this think, count, positive intervention, the frequency of his destructive thoughts showed a sharp drop while his loving thoughts increased. And he ended up discontinuing this intervention after only 9 sessions or 9 days, but continued to track the thoughts. At a 4 month follow up, loving thoughts remained high and the destructive thoughts remained low, indicating the intervention led to durable improvement. Now, some of the really interesting things about this study is if you see these books on the side, these books are what a lot of behavior analysts call the behavior analyst Bible per se, which is the book that we all use to learn about applied behavior analysis. Cooper is the first author of these books. And it's really interesting to me that he actually published this article. It's only a page long and it talks about how he was having these non-wife thoughts and thoughts about how frustrated he was taking his son to work. He had frustrating thoughts about his mother-in-law, but he was able to change them by, if you look at this chart, you see the X's are destructive thoughts and the dots are the loving thoughts. Now, he was able to actually start with the self-recording and charting, and anytime you see those dots and the X's at the bottom half of the chart, that means that he's recording all day. So he's measuring all day, and you can see those dots are below those X's. So he's having more destructive thoughts than he's having loving thoughts. And as soon as he introduced that timing, we can see where it says think slash count positives, where he has those dots on the upper part of the graph in the chart. Those are the 1 minute timings where he's timing for how many times he can think positive thoughts. Now, what I'm going to ask everybody do that's listening is go and grab a pen and pencil. If you don't have a pen and pencil, take out your phone and open the notes app so you can write a character because together we are going to do a 1 minute timing. So I'm going to give you time to get out a pen and pencil. You can use anything from, I have one of these little counters that you can press for each time. I have one of these. And what you're going to do is you're going to think of as many positive thoughts about yourself as you can. And for each time you think of one positive thought, make a tally mark or press a button on your phone or something so that you can mark one instance. After the minute is up, we're going to stop and then we're going to count up how many we were able to get in that amount of time. And if you feel comfortable, it would be nice if you could enter the amount of total that you had at the end of the timing. I'm going to once again give us a few seconds to get that pen, pencil, paper, or phone. And when I say please begin, we're going to begin. Remember, do not repeat any of the same positive thoughts. They have to all be new ones as you generate them. Um, all right. When I say please begin, we're going to begin. Ready, set, please begin. And stop. Okay. I want you in the chat to write how many you were able to get. Count them up and then write them, please. We got 11, we got 13, we got 21, we got 16, 15. Okay, these numbers are coming in faster than I can count at that cadence. But we're getting 19, 11. It was a family effort. 10, 14, 22, 12. Okay, good. Now, I think that one thing that you may be noticing is that in that 1 minute, it can get kind of tough to talk nicely about yourself, right? My count was 52, but that's only because I've done this quite a bit of times and I've practiced and I've learned how to break it down. And we're going to talk about this. And one thing that you can do if you feel the compulsion, you can go to jaredvan.com/SCC. I've created a website so that you can be able to chart these things. And you can just go over here where it says you go to chart your data on the side, and you can go to the date. You can see the Excel number, the number that you wanted to increase, which was whatever you got. This time I got 52, so I would have put 52, 0 for the D cell. Counting time would be 1 minute, and then you could put it on a standard acceleration chart, right? And it'll populate and look something like this. And this is what we use to measure the behavior across time. The reason why we use this is it can count from one per day to 1,000 per minute, which is essentially the entire range of human behavior. Nothing goes faster than those things. So it's nice. And I'm not going to get super into that chart, but I just want to let you guys know it's there. So I love how you all counted. Keep that pen and pencil and paper or phone near you because we may be coming back to this. But before we do, let's get into this whole inner behavior thing. Now, inner behavior is under the umbrella term of private events. Inner behavior refers to thoughts, feelings, and urges that occur privately within the individual. So, like I said, it's a subset of private events, and it's considered a subset of the specific category of private events, where there has been debate within psychology about the role and significance of inner behavior, especially in radical behaviorism. However, many behaviorists and researchers acknowledge the existence of inner behavior, as valid private events. Methods have been developed to study inner behavior, such as self-reporting, tracking frequencies of thoughts and feelings, and examining the relationship between inner and outer behavior. The intervention we're going to be talking about today is an inner behavior intervention. Inner behavior interventions involve 1 minute timings and self recording procedures to improve private verbal behaviors, i.e., people's thoughts and feelings about themselves. The person makes a list of their positive and negative thoughts and feelings about themselves. They spend 1 minute each day writing down, saying aloud, or thinking as many of the positive items as they can and counting how many that were produced in that minute. Doing this daily 1 minute timing leads to the number of positive thoughts and feelings to accelerate and the negative ones to decelerate. And it's based on Skinner's idea that private events, while harder to observe, are no different in kind from overt behaviors that can be modified using similar procedures. Precision teaching is used to measure, monitor, and make rapid data-based decision. Now, it's not just positive and negative thoughts and feelings. There's all types of different flavors of thoughts and feelings that we can measure and change. And of course, we're going to get to anxiety, but I'm going to walk y'all down that path as we go through how it's looked in the research and how we can do it and work with our students. Because while, yes, this is about anxious and anxiety students, we also have students that may have depressive thoughts and feelings. We may have students who have a lot of angry thoughts and feelings, and we want to work on those too. So this is a great way to work on those, and you could use it for yourself as well. And clearly, it helped Cooper save his marriage. So if you're thinking about that, that can help with that as well. So some common objections to inner behavior research is that there's a lack of observable and measurable data, the subjectivity and interpretation, and reliance on self-report. Now, in Cooper's book, one of those books that I was talking about before, they say that research on private event does not necessarily involve indirect measurement. A research participant who has been trained to observe his own private events is measuring the behavior of interest directly. Radical behaviorism doesn't insist upon truth by agreement and can therefore consider events taking place in the private world within the skin. It does not call these events unobservable, and it does not dismiss them as subjective. So, as we go throughout our lives, throughout our days, we can recognize and learn to recognize the times when we feel anxious, when we feel frustrated, when we feel happy. And we can count those amount of times. And when we count them, really cool things happen. And then when we do this inner behavior intervention, even cooler things happen. Now, I'm going to start getting into some of the different research that has been done with some of the different participants, starting with this girl with autism. And like I said, these QR codes on the side lead to like videos I've made because I make videos on Instagram and TikTok to really get this kind of information out there because I can write an article all day, but who's going to actually read it? A lot of I can reach a lot more people through Instagram and TikTok. So let's watch this.
Hey, yo, have you heard about the study where precision teachers increase confident thoughts in an adolescent with autism? So, this is a story about how a 15-year-old girl with a diagnosis of autism and clinically diagnosed with post traumatic stress disorder and depression was able to change the frequency of her despondent or problematic thoughts with 1 minute timings. This intervention that used precision teaching and behavior science was cost effective and easy to implement. Let me tell you about it. So first, she was assessed by a local university psychology clinic before the study, which diagnosed PTSD after the participants self-reported feelings of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation to a school counselor. She also reported frequent thoughts reflecting a negative opinion about herself. The dependent variable or thing that they were trying to change were DTs or despondent thoughts. They were private events or inner behavior that created fear or worry about future events accompanied by a physiological change such as increased blood pressure noticeable to the participant. Some examples of DTs included I'm stupid, I'm a failure, and I hate myself. Prior to the intervention, the participant generated a list of approximately 30 thoughts that were measured via the participant's self-report. The participant referred to these exemplars until she can be sure to identify the DT. So first, during baseline, the participant collected data on the number of despondent thoughts and feelings with a mechanical counter like this. She set the timer on her cell phone for 30 minutes and began self-recording. Now here comes the intervention. She began counting confident thoughts during a 1 minute time trial every day. She listed approximately 30 confident thoughts such as I'm smart, I can do this, I'm a good friend, I like who I am, I'm a success. Similar to DTs, the list of self-generated confident thoughts was used to teach the participant to recognize a confident thought. Here's data on the standard acceleration chart, but I'm going to make it a little bit easier to read. Here's that same data on a standard acceleration chart segment commonly used for journals due to space concerns, but faithfully reports levels of trend or acceleration, level and bounce or variability. Towards that last day of data collection, she started feeling a lot better and more confident, so she asked to stop the intervention. We love seeing researchers respect assent, and that's what happened here. The participant was given the option to restart the intervention at any time she wanted. She was given the Beck Anxiety Inventory and the Beck Depression Inventory once again, and the results translate from borderline clinical depression at the beginning of the study to a mild mood disorder at the end of the study, leading to a change in her clinical diagnosis. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the fact that she no longer reported having suicidal ideation after the intervention. She even showed some of her friends how to do the timings when they told her that they felt sad. So what does this tell us? Individuals with autism who are taught to detect and report their feelings can use 1 minute timings to change the frequency of problematic thoughts and feelings. Now I want to know what you think. Do you think that more people should use this treatment for this kind of problem? Let me know in the comments below.
So I don't make content where I'm speaking that fast anymore. I thought that I had to speak fast like everybody else, but so it's always a little bit cringy watching that. That was back in 2023, but we learn better, we do better. So In this study, what we learned is when we teach individuals, especially individuals with autism, how to detect when they're feeling that anxious thought or feeling some type of thought, they can accurately record when it's happening. And then they can use this intervention, this 1 minute timing, to reduce their anxious thoughts and feelings or depressive thoughts and feelings. And like I said in the video, the coolest thing, in my opinion, is that she no longer had that suicidal ideation after the study compared to when she started it. And her anxiety went down, a whole lot of things. And one of the best indicators of social validity of whether or not she felt it was good to use is her telling her friends, "Hey, if you're feeling sad, I learned this thing that you should do as well. That will make you not feel sad anymore and will make you feel more confident thoughts." So that's one of the great things that this can be able to do. So it doesn't just translate from individuals that are neurotypical, it could also go to our neurodivergent community. All right, so we'll go on to, so we looked at older man and his non-wife thoughts. We went to somebody that had autism that was adolescent. Now let's kind of change things up a little bit. Let's talk about aggressive thoughts. So this individual was a master's student. Koskowitz et al. Describes a self-experiment where the participant used an inner behavior intervention to manage his own aggressive thoughts and feelings. During baseline, he counted and charted his daily aggressive thoughts and feelings for 6 weeks, and self-recording alone did not reduce the frequency. In the first intervention phase, he added daily 1 minute counting periods where he would tally as many non-aggressive thoughts as possible. But unfortunately, and I'll show the chart in a minute, this did not significantly affect his aggressive thoughts compared to baseline. In the second intervention, he switched to doing 10-second counting periods of non-aggressive thoughts spread throughout the day. This produced an immediate drop in aggressive thoughts. Alternating between the 1 minute and distributed 10-second counting procedures, the distributed counting consistently resulted in lower levels of aggressive thoughts. And by the end of the study, distributed counting phase and final baseline phase, Koslowitz was having mostly zero aggressive thoughts per day. And he attributed the effectiveness of the intervention to the distributed counting. So as we can see in this chart, in the beginning, look at all those X's. Look at where those X's are. When we see those X's bouncing up and down all around the chart, that means that it has a lot of bounce or variability. And when we see a lot of bounce or variability with our data like this, we know that there's not a lot of control. He's having a super angry day one day and a less angry day the next day and a super angry day then a less angry day. So there's not a lot of control for him with his anger and his thoughts and feelings. Then he introduced the 1 minute counting, and we don't see that much of a difference. Then we see the 10-second counting, the C1 area, and we see a lower level of the X's. And then we go back to the B2, which is the 1 minute counting. Didn't really do much. Went back to the C2, and we could see those X's hitting that near zero level. So this shows us that one of the ways that might be beneficial for students is that not just doing a 1 minute counting period per day, but distributing that counting period throughout the day. So you have 10 seconds in the morning, 10 seconds a little bit late in 2 hours, 10 seconds in the next 3 hours. So he said that having that time to calm down, to think non-aggressive thoughts really helped him. And he was able to actually have fewer aggressive thoughts as he moved on. So that's really great. So now we have non-wife thoughts, we have individual with autism, we have aggressive thoughts and feelings. Let's move on to see what else we can do with this. We have a senior citizen with positive and negative inner behaviors, right? This study evaluated a 66-year-old female participant's self-management of positive and negative inner behaviors, where they did timed counting of positive inner behaviors. Then they switched to response prompt procedure with including SAFMEDS, which are say all fast minute everyday shuffle, just a worksheet of all the positive thoughts and feelings they had on a worksheet. They returned to baseline and a follow-up assessment. So I know the study well enough, I could just talk about it. At first, they tried that 1 minute counting where they just try to think. Sometimes when you just try to think of all the positive thoughts, it's hard because you don't think positive thoughts about yourself a lot. With our students, one thing that I've noticed sometimes, especially, is it can be very difficult for them to think confident or positive thoughts or say nice things about themselves. So just having them try and try again is not always going to be good enough. So what we found here is that when she was able to take time to write down all the positive things that she could think about herself, and then she came and did the 1 minute timing where she just read them off, that had the same effect where you see those X's and those dots have a crossover effect where eventually the X's were below the dots being the behavior we want to accelerate, the positives, and the X's being the behavior we want to decelerate, the negatives. They crossed over. So we were able to use that worksheet so that they can be able to read off of the worksheet with the positive thoughts and feelings. And then they had many more positives and much fewer negatives, which is a great thing. So we know that for our students that find it difficult to generate positive or confident thoughts and feelings, we can have them create their own positive thoughts and feelings worksheets, have them read off of that, and then we can kind of wean them off of it so that they can do it themselves without having to use that worksheet and use that kind of work aid. Now, I don't know if you have if I have anybody that wants to put a emoji in the chat if you have students that forget their homework or students that are often forgetful of things. Well, people have also done research on this as well with the same type of thing. This person was named Melissa Judy, and before the intervention began, she was struggling with frequent instances of forgetting to complete tasks, recall information, or follow through on short-term intentions. She decided to track these lapses in memories, which she termed forgets, using a wrist-worn counter to click each time she noticed one. Melissa collected this baseline data on her forgets for several weeks before beginning the intervention, establishing her typical frequency of forgetting. So this is for if a student forgets their homework. If you ever go into the fridge, you open it up and you're like, what did I come in here for? And then you're like, oh man, now I have to go back upstairs or what have you. They were able to, over the course of the intervention, have the frequency of forgets decrease by simply adding a 1 minute daily session of verbalizing pre-written self-statements affirming improvements in her memory while continuing to track forgets. So we see over here on the chart, you can see where it says 10, it's around tens. Then you go up one line, 20, 30, 40, all the way to 50, and then 100. So we can see that she was bouncing starting at around, the first time she counted, it was like 11. Then it was near like 17. Then it went way up to counting up to like 30 per day. And then we can see once she started that intervention of counting the 1 minute counting procedure to affirm not forgetting, we can see those forgets decelerate. So she was able to help her memory by doing this 1 minute counting procedure, which I think is really interesting. It can be really helpful. Moving along, we have another one. This one is with Diane. We can see Diane is in her 20s, and she came to researchers recognizing she had issues with her self-talk. But like many clients, she wasn't entirely clear about what exactly she wanted to change. So they started with the definition phase. She spent 30 minutes each day just paying attention and counting her positive and negative thoughts about herself. This wasn't intervention yet, just awareness building. Once she felt confident she can distinguish between positive and negative self-thoughts, they moved on to the real measurement phase. And I think this is really important for our younger learners who especially are male learners because males are not necessarily taught in society about their feelings, how to feel their feelings, how to think about their feelings, and how to feel the wealth and range of feelings other than anger and frustration. We have to work with them on being able to feel all these other things. So teaching them how to detect their feeling is really an important thing. During the baseline period, Diane's chart revealed something interesting. Her positive and negative thoughts were running neck and neck, almost mirror images of one another. When she had a bad day with lots of negative self-talk, she'd also have more positive thoughts, as if she was trying to compensate, and the frequencies were close and they moved together. This gave researchers about 10 days of solid baseline data. When they introduced the 1 minute timing, the results were immediate and dramatic. Each day, Diane would spend 1 minute writing down as many positive things about herself that she could think of, not just things that she believed, but also positive things others had told her, even if she wasn't convinced yet. Within days, you could see the separation happening on her chart. Her positive thoughts stepped up significantly, while her negatives began to drift downward. Even more interesting, both behaviors became less erratic. Day to day, bounce or variability decreased, suggesting more stability in her self perception. So we can see how that happened. For the third phase, she changed her approach entirely. Instead of just generating any positive thoughts during her 1 minute session, she specifically focused on positives that were direct opposites of her most persistent negative thoughts. So we can see we're coming up with tactics and strategies to combat these negative thoughts about yourself, right? The This targeted approach worked beautifully. She not only maintained her positive gains, but finally got those negative thoughts to go down to where she wanted them. The real test case came a month later when researchers checked back in with her without running any formal intervention. Diane had maintained these improvements. Her positive self talk stayed elevated, her negative self talk stayed low, and this wasn't just a temporary change while she was paying attention. It had become her new normal. For practitioners, this case demonstrates the power of systematic measurement in helping clients not just recognize patterns, but adapt their strategies when initial approaches aren't fully effective. So we can see how we're able to kind of manipulate and change the intervention based on what's going on with the person. Um, this is another elderly patient. Oh, no, it's not an elderly patient. This is a person in their 30s. But it's a similar kind of instance where they had but this time they had high positives and kind of near the same negatives. But the problem was they were having trouble just getting those pesky negatives further down. Um, so what they did was they started using that intervention where she created think right instead of simply just think tally. She wrote out the things and then she ended up saying them out loud. And what she noticed is that you can say things faster than you can write them. So she was able to get more by saying them out loud than just by writing them. And that had an effect on her overall number of positive statements per day. Question.
Dr. Van, we got our first question in the chat. So Amy asks if students are feeling uncomfortable or really having a difficult time coming up with those positive self thoughts, should we list some for them?
Great question. So, what we really want to do is we want to have them generate it, but we do want to say things like, what are the kind of things like I'll say, my grandma always says I'm a handsome young man, right? I'm in my 30s. But she'll say that. So, what are things that other people have said about you, right? And while you may not believe them now, just write them down. Have them be part of the words or the phrases or the sentences that you use. Because while you may not believe them now, as you go along and build fluency with this practice, you'll start to believe them. And you can point out things that they're good at, like on the when they go to recess, or things that they've done well in class. You could be like, "Well, you did well at this, so you're good at that." You kind of can lead them there. It's best for them to come up with it, but when they're struggling like that, we want to help them figure out things because especially when you're in grade school, especially middle school, it can be very difficult for you to come up with those things yourself when you're dealing with all that anxiety and that self-doubt. So, another question, I could see it. For students who cannot write well, how would you recommend doing this with a supportive adult in the classroom? So, one of the beautiful things about this, and I was going to get to this later, but I think it's a good time to talk about it now, is the student never has to disclose what they're actually thinking and feeling. They don't have to actually tell you the anxious thought or the negative thought. They just give you the count. So it gives them still a sense of privacy with their own thoughts and feelings. They just count. So what I would do is either get them a little clicker like this, so you just a tally counter that has the number. I also have one of these little guys that you just press it, or just make tallies, right? And you could even, I would have my whole class do this. Like we would set the timer and everybody would be doing it. And if people felt like they wanted to share, they could. If they didn't want to share, no shame in that. And yes, this can relate to early education because it's about thoughts and feelings. You know what I mean? This is about recognizing our thoughts and feelings. And I'll get to this later, but I'll kind of preview it now. One of the coolest things about when students measure their thoughts and feelings throughout the day, they notice what occurred to make them feel that thought or feeling or what happened around that time. They're like, oh yeah, I recognized I started doing a lot of tallies whenever Jake came around me. So I think that there's something going on. I may not have good thoughts and feelings when Jake starts to come around, and that kind of way helps them understand their world as it's existing because it can be tough to recognize what's happening, why it's happening, why am I feeling like this? But when they have that count and they see, oh, I counted right now. What's going on in my environment to make me count? Then they become more cognizant and aware of what's going on. And we'll see more of that as we go along. So, next one is Christine, who is three or was 3.5 years old. And her story with inner behavior is remarkable, especially considered she was only 3.5 when she volunteered for this project. After overhearing the researchers discussing it, she chose to focus on her selfish thoughts, what she was thinking inside her head about wanting things for herself or not wanting, excuse me, or not wanting to share. During the initial baseline phase, where Christine simply counted her selfish thoughts throughout her 300-minute nursery school day, the researchers noticed something important. Her selfish thoughts were occurring at relatively low frequency compared to her selfish acts. But when trend lines showed that they were gradually increasing over time, this suggested if left unchecked, her inner selfishness might have become more problematic. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to record and chart this and these behaviors. What makes Christine's case particularly fascinating is that she can reliably distinguish between having a selfish thought versus acting selfishly, a sophisticated cognitive skill for a preschooler. She carried a risk counter and clicked it each time she caught herself thinking something selfish, like wanting a toy from another child that they were playing with or not wanting to share her snack. To address her increases in selfish thoughts, the researchers tried something that required considerable courage for the young child. They asked Christine to say her selfish thought out loud whenever they occurred. So, like, imagine being a 3-year-old and having to announce to your nursery school class, "I'm having a selfish thought," whenever she revealed that selfish thought, her teachers would gently correct her by saying something like, "It's not nice to be selfish." And this public accountability had an immediate dramatic effect. As we can see, those X's dropped down as soon as the intervention happened. Her selfish thoughts dropped sharply right after she started verbalizing them. And but then something interesting happened. The intervention showed a rebound effect. While her thoughts initially decreased dramatically, they began climbing again after several days, though they remained lower overall than they had been during the counting period. When Christine stopped verbalizing her thoughts and returned to just counting them silently, there was a brief spike on the second day, but then they began to decrease again on their own. And this pattern suggests that the intervention had created some lasting awareness, even after the public accountability was removed. And from a clinical standpoint, Christine's inner behavior data teaches us several important lessons about working with thoughts versus actions. The trajectory of her selfish thoughts was more complex and showed more variability than versus her selfish actions, which suggests that inner behavior might be inherently more difficult to change and sustain, requiring different expectations and possibly different intervention approaches. For practitioners, Christine's case demonstrates that even very young children can engage in meaningful self-monitoring of their inner world, but that thoughts may follow a different change pattern than observable behaviors. So yeah, sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. That's why I shouldn't have the chat near me because I'm always like trying to say, what are they saying? What are they saying? But yeah, so we see a 3.5-year-old that's able to engage in this. No, no, no problem, Courtney. I love it. Thank you for putting stuff in there. Um, but we can see that children as young as 3.5 years old can do it. And then we can go to people as old as 88, individuals in assisted living facilities. I'm not going to go deep down on this one, but basically, we're showing the range of ages of individuals that can be able to use these interventions so that we can understand the participant characteristics that these interventions can serve, right? So I did this whole literature review. This was my actual dissertation where I looked at all these things. I looked at the number of baseline days, intervention days, total days. What was the dose? Like how many times a day did they implement this intervention and what kind of way by using the dose form and the cumulative dose. And then I came to recognize, hey, look at this. For all of the research we have, everybody only did 1 minute timing per day when it comes to the inner behavior interventions. When we're in actual school, and a lot of this is based off of what we do in academia, the 1 minute timing. It comes from if you do the math fact fluency charts where you have to do as many as you can in 1 minute. It's kind of the same. But you would never have a student just do one and then be like, okay, we did one timing. We'll come back to it tomorrow. No, you do multiple to build fluency to become better and get and fix your mistakes and what have you. In the research that I found, we're only doing 1 minute timing per day. So ideally, what we should do is more than 1 minute count per day. It's effective to do 1 minute counting per day, but we could probably be a whole lot more effective with more than 1 minute counting per day. Say that 1,000 times fast. So in fit learning, which improve math and reading skill and writing skills, they do 3 timings per day per skill. At Morningside Academy, they do 1 to 8. In Tier 1, 1 to 3 timings per day per skill in their academics. So that prompts us to know that our inner behavior intervention should probably be doing around 3 per day. So some major findings I found in my literature review is that inner behavior interventions are decades old and replicable. Private events follow the same behavioral principles as outer behavior. Balance or variability often decreases before frequency does, and prompts and timing structures affect outcomes. Additionally, self-monitoring of inner behavior is reliable with training. We could teach children how to self-monitor and self-count those inner behaviors. Additionally, behavior changes accompanied by improved emotional or functional outcomes and intervention effects tend to generalize and maintain. I see we have a question. Does the intervention only change the inner behavior, or are there any research on changes to external behaviors that may be related to the anxiety, i.e., nail biting, school refusal, somatic complaints? Great question. And I was just telling Ashley about how this happens. People will ask a question, and then on the next slide, I'm about to answer it. So I'm going to answer your question by going to the next slide. And we're going to talk about my inner behavior. So here's my chart. Now I want you to notice how that first dot is over by that 10, about at 12. The first time I did a timing for 1 minute, I got up to 12 per minute, right? When I got to my aim, my goal, which was 50 per minute, I started to have a lot of changes in my outer life. One of the changes was that I was more confident and I was actually just playing basketball better. I was playing basketball better to a point to where my friends that I played basketball with in the mornings were like, "Hey, Jared, why don't you come? We play at the weekends over here. So why don't you come on and play with us then?" Then there was another effect to where I had a cohort member in my PhD program who would often say things that were like little snipes, little shots at my self-confidence. And we were at a conference one time, and she said one of these snipes or shots at my self-confidence, and it tried to hit me, and it was like I had a shield and it just bounced off. And I was like, no, I'm amazing. I'm smart. I'm fantastic. I got great hair. I'm beautiful. Like I could not be hurt by her typical aims and criticisms. And it just bounced right off of me. And I wasn't kind of stuck in the mire of, oh, this person thinks that I'm not smart. So I had all of these things going for me that I was doing better in school and all this stuff. And we'll see more outer behavior changes. But yes, these outer behaviors change, the research is so young. I wouldn't say it's young. There's so little research on this that we can't really show a whole lot of inner be or outer behavior changes. I'm going to show you some of my work with anxious middle schoolers that show some outer behavior changes, but we need more research because one thing that we know is when we're feeling better, we do things better. We do things differently. When we don't feel as well, we might stay in. We might no not participate as much. We might not want to go to school. So I'll get into that more right now as I talk about my pilot study with my middle school students. So right here we have a chart of some of my middle school students during my pilot study. I always let my students name themselves. So we had Professor Oak, we had Groot, and we have football. So Oak was the youngest out of all of the middle schoolers, and you can see the X's, and it doesn't look like much changed other than the variability, right? And that's just the quantitative, the number, right? But then I also had pre and post questionnaires where I spoke with them and I asked them about the study and what they thought. And Professor Oak said before it was more of just I hated anxiety, but now it's kind of a protective mechanism. Now stress is easier to cope with because now it's more of that mechanism instead of just an anxious thought or feeling that blocks any work from really getting done. He also said situations are usually less stressful and more manageable. So while we didn't see a huge drop, maybe the magnitude uh, or how hard or how strong the anxiety felt less, right? So that's something that we have to look into the future of how do we measure that magnitude? We measured the total count, the frequency per day, but how do we get to that magnitude? Groot said, I think that I said, reflecting on your participation in the program, how would you describe any changes in your thoughts and feelings towards anxiety? And Groot said, I think that they've gotten better and I don't have as many thoughts like that. When I come across an anxious thought, I'd like try to think of a positive one. That is called contingency adduction. I did not teach her that, but she came up with that skill on her own by being by once she became fluent, she was able to come up with new strategies. And she said, if I can't think of a positive thought like that, I should probably talk to somebody about that. So this is another thing that I didn't teach her, but she came up with her own after she started becoming making after it started becoming easier to talk confidently about herself. Um, then for football, he said, I feel like I just don't have as much anxiety. I think the 1 minute timing definitely helped because it's like you can almost see those numbers increase by day. And I made sure that they put their behavior on standard acceleration charts so they could see those dots go up and those X's go down. Kids love to see that. And then he said, I guess I'm doing better in school than I was, just grades overall. That was an unintended huge effect of this intervention. Now the student is just doing better in school because they're less anxious and have less anxiety, which I think is amazing, which brings us to my actual dissertation, which this study is going to be published soon. I've been working to get it published and I submitted the manuscript, so we just got to wait now. So this involved 4 middle school students with 504 plans identified by the school psychologist with high levels of anxiety. I asked for students of diverse racial and cultural backgrounds, and in this setting was anxiety. And I asked for them to select their most anxiety-inducing class, and that's the class in which they would count how many anxious thoughts and feelings they had. I don't know what was going on with the school. Almost all the students picked history class. I don't know if it was the teacher. I don't know if it was the content. I used to love history class. I would think it was going to be science or math, but no, it was history class. So that was really interesting to me. It was 3 girls, 1 boy, all who three who identified as white and 1 who identified as Asian. So multiple baseline. So training procedure participants were taught to identify and count anxious thoughts and confident thoughts using explicit examples and modeling. Practice ensured students could accurately count and distinguish thought types before baseline and intervention began. And they logged data on Precision X using a standard acceleration chart, which is an app that costs money. My website is free. So you can use that to be able to have them chart their inner behavior. So what I chose to do is I have an entry order and who went into intervention first. Basically, I said whoever has the highest level of anxious thoughts, highest acceleration of anxious thoughts, and highest grade variability of anxious thoughts, went into intervention first. All we needed to do this intervention was a tally counter like the one I have right here. You could even just use a paper and a pencil, a notebook and a pencil, a timer, and that Precision X software, which you can use my website for free. So it's very cheap to implement. You don't really need much other than the materials that you already have in your classroom and a timer. So when we look at our students, we had Mason, the cheerleader, Sleepy CC, and Anosuke. All students showed some level of improvement. There was a reduction in bounds, which is that variability in anxious thoughts, a trend reversal or deceleration, so that we saw that the behavior decreased over time after the intervention. We could see on the left side of that dotted line is the baseline, on the right side of the dotted line is the intervention. And even without trend change, behavior became more regulated, and there was evidence of increased control and stability over anxiety. So let's dive a little bit deeper into each participant real quick. So Mason was our youngest participant. He started out the first time he went to class and he measured, or overall in general, he had 34 anxious thoughts, which was the average of anxious thoughts per classroom. So they did about a 90-minute class. So he had 34 anxious thoughts per 90-minute class. And we can see that during baseline, Mason's anxious thoughts were increasing slightly. And once intervention started, his anxious thoughts began to drop steadily, about 58% deceleration. And his highest count of confident thoughts in 1 minute was 73. He got higher than I've ever been able to get. So he was really cooking and he really enjoyed it and he had fun and he really loved this intervention. But as you can see, his behavior like just shot up. The anxious thoughts and feelings went down. When I later asked him and talked with him about how he felt, one of the most interesting things happened. I'm like, man, this guy had the greatest effect. You can clearly see a difference. So he's got to be saying that he's feeling crazily different. He told me he didn't feel much different. So I was like thinking, okay, so what is it that made him say that? Well, I also asked him, how did you get up to 73 per minute? And he said, well, my strategy is I sit in the chair and as we start the timer, I look around and I see a chair and I say, oh, I can sit in that chair really well. Or I see a piece of paper. Oh, I can write on that paper really well, right? So he was seeing and in his mind saying what he can do instead of really just thinking and feeling things about himself. So he's working on in different learning channels. So maybe he didn't feel like it was as great because he wasn't doing the same thing as other participants when they were trying to pull like from the ether different positive thoughts and feelings or confident thoughts and feelings. For example, the cheerleader started out with a baseline of 17 anxious thoughts and feelings. And as soon as she started, the interventions were at around 17 anxious thoughts and feelings, but there was a strong trend reversal so that there was deceleration or decrease in anxious thoughts and feelings. And she felt more confident. And one of the things she said was she had like nationals going on at the time, and she felt really anxious about going to nationals for her cheerleading. And she felt that the 1 minute timing really helped calm her down, and especially during class. Sleepy Cece, she said we did our timings in the morning, and that's one thing to know is when are you going to do your timings? Sleepy Cece, she picked her name as Sleepy Cece because she says she always feels sleepy in the morning. These are middle schoolers, and so I only could work with them in the morning, but maybe think about when they're a little bit more awake. But she said that she had difficulty, and you could see her have difficulty getting that confident thoughts higher because her highest confident thought count in 1 minute was 14. Now, we never did the worksheet. I never had her actually write down as many confident thoughts as possible and use the worksheet. So she would have been a participant for which that worksheet would have been really good. I had already written out the parameters of my intervention, so I couldn't do too much changing at the time. But this is an indicator of when they're kind of plateauing. It indicates to us, oh, we need to change our strategy and have them write that worksheet and then see and say these things and then slowly take those things away so that they can be able to pull it to themselves by themselves, right? Then we had Inosuke, who Her thing was she had panic attacks. So it wasn't so much that they were a high number of anxious thoughts and feelings, but they were super intense when she had the anxiety. So intense so that you see a lot of missing data on this chart because she straight up didn't come to school some days because she felt so anxious, right? So one thing that happened was as she was able to do the intervention, she says that she has fewer anxiety attacks, and when she does have anxiety attacks, they are less intense. And that's what this intervention was able to do for her. So these numbers are cool and they're great and they look super scientific, but I think that one of the most important things is the qualitative data. What was the quality of the intervention? So I did a thematic analysis and I found a few themes for the students. One of them was school-related anxiety triggers. Students identified specific concrete sources of stress, tests, certain teachers, group work with unfamiliar peers, and unpredictable classroom dynamics. Anosuke even cried during her pre-study interview while talking about her third grade trauma with her teacher, which helped show how negative teacher interactions can create long-lasting anxiety patterns. The cheerleader distinguished between odd days, which are harder classes, and even days, showing that students develop sophisticated awareness of their anxiety triggers. There was internalized self-doubt and avoidance, where students describe protective but limiting behaviors, such as winging it instead of asking for help, shutting down when feeling overwhelmed, and fear of being seen as dumb or burdensome. Sleepy CC's strategy of avoiding help seeking and Mason's belief that teachers have better things to do than to help him reveal how anxiety creates self-defeating cycles that prevent students from accessing supports. There was social support and connection, where despite these challenges, students valued relationships such as lunch with friends, supportive teachers, and constant routines. Art class emerged as an emotional refuge for multiple students. The daily check-ins that I had with students during the study became meaningful connections, where many students appreciated just having someone to talk to who cared about their daily experiences. The self-monitoring and increased awareness of inner behavior happened as well, where the intervention helped students identify triggers and develop skills. And Nosuke learned to track anxiety across the day and identify test taking as a trigger. Students gained language to describe their inner experiences and began recognizing patterns of their anxiety, moving from passive victims to active observers of their mental states. Then there was perceived change and ongoing challenges. Students' responses varied, but most developed new tools. The cheerleader learned to redirect attention to positives during anxious movements, and Osuke reported fewer panic attacks with with induced intensity and better preparation strategies. Even Mason, who felt limited change occurred, developed environmental scanning techniques for confident thoughts. And students learned that anxiety could be managed rather than simply endured, right? So we learned that that inner behavior can be measured and changed. The standard acceleration chart gave students visual feedback on their own anxiety patterns because the numbers are cool, but seeing that visual display of the chart with the dots and the x's changing really means something to the students because that's a look inside their own head and a look at the previous day. The 1 minute timing helped build fluency and confident thoughts. And this is all consistent with Calkins' 2002 findings on self-monitoring and the refinement of inner behavioral repertoires. So one of the things that I mentioned before is dose and optimization. So interventions could be more effective if sometimes you spaced out the distributed practice, more frequent but shorter sessions like the 10 6 second time or the 6 10 second timings instead of the 1 60 second timing. Maybe the prompt sheet or SAFMEDs to scaffold confident thoughts generation, like Sleepy CC could have benefited from, and differentiating dose mirrors principles of individualized instruction in special education. So this all matters because students, teachers, behavior analysts, and school psychologists need low cost, fast, effective ways to manage anxiety. This study offers a behavior analytic solution to an emotional challenge that shows private events can be targeted with scientific tools. It can advance equity in mental health and education, and we need more studies like this. Some limitations are that it measured frequency, not intensity or duration of anxiety. There was only a short amount of time in which we did this study, and future work should explore adaptation with students with IEPs or higher support needs, special education populations, more diverse populations, explore culturally responsive scaffolds and language supports for English learners, track long-term outcomes, and track changes in dose delivery and daily doses. So like I've said before, many a times, this study operates at the intersection of mental health, special education, behavior science, and precision teaching. Students with anxiety are often left out of both social emotional learning and IEP services. My study creates a bridge using tools grounded in precision teaching and things that you have already in your class, but aligned with special education principles of access, equity, and inclusion, right? So some things that we want to talk about is like, why do the 1 minute? Why is this important? And you might be wondering, why 1 minute? Is it just an arbitrary number? Well, it's not. The 1 minute timing comes from precision teaching, and the reason it works, it ties into something called behavioral fluency. Carl Binder defined fluency as accuracy plus speed. Doing the right thing without hesitation. And that's really an important distinction. In most educational settings, we stop when a student gets something right. They can identify an anxious thought, great, but we move on. We really need them to be able to do something correctly and do it automatically, which are two very different things. We need the accuracy and the speed, which builds competent performance. Think about it this way. A student might be able to tell you in a calm, quiet room that nobody likes me is an anxious thought, but can they catch an anxious thought in the middle of a test while the kid next to them is tapping their pencil when they're already stressed? That's where fluency matters. If the skill is slow and effortful, it breaks down under real world conditions. The 1 minute timing isn't just a measurement tool, it's a fluency building procedure. Each time a student sits down and counts their thoughts for 1 minute, they're practicing. And that repeated practice is what moves the skill from I can do this to I do this automatically, right? Um, it really helps students with this acronym called AREAS. I say it helps students in all areas, which is application, retention, endurance, adduction, and stability. Um, I can put it in the AER areas. So that's the acronym. So retention refers to, it means that the skill sticks over time without retracting. For our students, that means that they learn to detect and counter anxious thoughts in October, and they can still do it after winter break without starting from scratch. That's huge for emotional support teachers who lose instructional time to breaks and translations and transitions. Endurance means that the skill holds up under pressure. The student can keep self-monitoring even when the classroom is loud, even when they're tired, even when they're having a bad day. This is directly relevant to anxiety because anxiety is worst exactly when conditions are hardest. If the skill isn't enduring, it fails to precisely meet what is needed the most. Application means the skill transfers. A student who builds fluency during your structured 1 minute timing starts noticing their thoughts during a test, on the bus, at home, without being told to, which is the whole goal. We want this to become something that they, on their own, they can notice, not something that they do when the teacher is standing over them with a timer. Now, there are two more that I'm not going to go really deep into today. Stability, which means the skill persists even when with distractions. Like if a lawnmower is going on, they're still able to do the skill with fluency. And adduction, which is when fluent skills combine with new, more complex behaviors that the student was never directly taught. Kind of like how students came up with their own strategies. That's adduction. They were able to adduce, and they were able to have the skill that you taught them tag on to something that they taught themselves so you don't have to teach it directly. And these aren't just theoretical claims. There's decades of research showing that when you build performance to a specific frequency level, these outcomes follow. And that's the power of the 1 minute timing, not just data collection, it's fluency building practice. So this slide connects it all. Without fluency, on the left, without fluency, the student can identify a thought correctly, but it takes concentration. It's effortful, and effortful skills don't survive contact with the real world. A busy classroom, a stressful test, a conflict with a friend, the skill falls apart. In the middle, building fluency. This is when the daily 1 minute timing comes in. It's not just an assessment, it's practice. Every timing is an opportunity for the student to go faster, more automatic, or more confident in their ability to detect and categorize their own thoughts. The timing is the practice, not just the test. And the way that I explain it to students is you're just trying to beat your own score. It's like, I don't know if we have anybody that's ever played Mario Kart in the chat or in the audience, but it's like when you're just trying to beat your own score from your previous lap or be that little ghost. Um, on the right is the fluent skill. Now the detection is automatic, low effort. It happens without the student even having to think about it. And because it's fluent, it's retained over breaks. It endures distractions and it applies to new situations. Um, so yeah, I love Mario Kart. So we need to find aims. So when I say we're freely thinking it and we're writing it, it's about 30 to 30, 35 to 30 per minute that we want to get them to. When it's coming to saying it out loud, 75 to 50. Free tally, we don't exactly have that number yet. And then free click, which is what I was doing, where I just click this counter thing, is 75 to 50. And precision teaching, we always put the bigger number first because we want the students to reach for the top and not just reach for the bottom. So when we're aiming with our students, we want to try to get to the 50. 50 is our aim, it's 50 per minute. And the ways to do that is to not say, I am a really cool guy, just cool. You know, I am really awesome, awesome. You know what I mean? Making those short words instead of long sentences. That's one way to go about it. And another way I do it is I'm a huge comic book nerd. So I just go over the Spider-Man titles. I go spectacular, awesome, stupendous. You know what I mean? I go over all those things. Um, so here's a little page about what to do if your student is stuck on a low level of positives per minute. It's okay to start low. Many people start with only a few positives per minute. That's normal. Low counts might reflect years of reinforcing negative self-talk or under-practiced positive self-talk. So you could try the See-Say intervention where you take a written list of positive thoughts and read them aloud for a minute. This uses the See-Say learning channel. You see it, then you say it. Example is you read, resilient, loves, learn fast, etc. It helps because it models the correct behavior. You hear yourself saying it. It supports recall and fluency, especially when your mind draws a blank, and it boosts momentum by increasing frequency and reducing hesitation. So I don't need to go into validity. You guys can look at this slide later. Um, things to know about inner behavior through the SCC. These are really cool things that we found is inner behavior can be counted and changed. Inner and outer behavior share the same behavioral laws. They respond to antecedents and consequences. They accelerate or decelerate with interventions. Positive and negative inner behaviors function independently. So while a lot of times we do see that change, we're not always going to see just because positives are going up doesn't always mean negatives are going up, which is why we count them both to make sure. People can self-monitor with high consistency. Inner and outer behaviors can change independently or together, and self-awareness and fluency grow with practice. So some of the things that have been done to change inner behavior across time are that 1 minute counting, which is the gold standard. There's that See-Say practice, the all-day counting. They could do the tell someone like Christine did. Replacement practice for every negative inner behavior, learners generate a matched opposite positive, and environmental prompts or aversive stimuli, which I don't recommend. We're not in the 70s anymore. We don't need to be snapping rubber bands on our wrists. But the fact is, it was done. Um, so what research needs to be done? Diverse populations, long-term follow-ups, and we need to work on urges, addictions, and substance abuse. Because, like I said in the beginning, what falls under the umbrella of inner behavior is thoughts, feelings, and urges. Here comes that sun that I told you all about. But yeah, I'm in California, so hi, son. Thoughts, feelings, and urges. So urges, one thing that I want to look into the future is maybe compulsions that if our students have OCD, a lot of times being on social media can really make a lot of students have body issue images, not just our girls, but boys too, when it comes to this thing called looks maxing that they're talking about now. So how can we use inner behavior to make them feel better about their body and reduce addiction and urges and stuff? So those are things that I'm interested in looking into. Also, how do we measure the intensity of an inner behavior? Because a lot of times students will tell us, I'm having an anxiety attack. And when students become when they've had a few of them, they can tell the difference between a really intense anxiety attack and an anxiety attack that, quote, wasn't that bad. So when we notice that our intervention is reducing the intensity or the magnitude of the anxiety attack, we know something's working, which is important feedback to get. Um, and then I'm gonna go all to this limitation and ethical consideration. Not all inner behavior needs to change. Feelings of sadness, fear, or anger, or even anxiety are not inherently bad. So we shouldn't expect all negatives to and thoughts or all anxious thoughts to go to zero. We also want to respect autonomy, consent, and assent. Individuals must be part of defining their own target behavior and therapeutic consideration. This is not a replacement for therapy, and behavior interventions can support and supplement, but not replace professional mental health care. Now, as we're wrapping up with my talking portion before we get into the questions, I want y'all to look at this list. This is a list of a whole bunch of positive thoughts and feelings. I am telling you to look at this list for a reason. You can see these things like good brother, good child, good parent, glorious, lyrical, loving, smart, interdependent, respectful, stick to diet, good appearance, poetic. You're looking at those words, right? I'm glad because I want you to grab that pencil, grab that phone, grab whatever you used to count last time. Remember what score you had last time? We're going to try to beat it. This time we're going to do our 1 minute timing. I'm going to take these little cheat sheets off the page and we're going to do our timing. All right. So get your timers ready. What I usually like to tell my students is either pencils up or timer up or whatever. And when I say please begin, you'll begin. Get them ready. Ready, set, please begin. And stop. All right. If you feel comfortable, please not only put the number that you got in the chat and then tell us if you improved, maintained, or you got fewer than you got before. I got 56 this time, so I improved. Growth. Love it. Improved. 15 plus 4. So what we're seeing is when we improve, we celebrate. You know what I mean? You are able to figure out more kind things about yourself. You want to add those things that other people might have added themselves, that other people might say to you. And even if you didn't improve, if you maintain or you had fewer, that's still information that we want to know so that we can see, okay, what are some things I need to say nicely about myself? It could be as simple as good eyes, good hair, nice smile, kind, generous, anything that you feel you could say. And even if you don't believe it at that time, you should still say it. Now, I'm going to show this slide. It's going to have some rough language, but it's something that I received. I create content online, so sometimes I get some vitriol on hate. This hate was specifically sent to me with racist intentions, right? And some of our students have to experience racism, sexism, ableism throughout their different environments they go throughout. So I think it's important for us to talk with our students and our learners to be able to create intentional positives about their identities to combat these racist, ableist, sexist behaviors and words and things that occur in their environment. So I created a self-positives for Black people, right? Self-positives for Black men, Black women, Black trans people, Black non-binary people. All these kinds of things that we might be told are not good enough, like good hair, good skin, all these things to combat the things that our environment attacks us with. So I think it's important to be specific to the student when we're trying to accelerate those inner behaviors because they could have a lot of aversive events in their environment that are based on their identity that are making them feel anxious, are making them feel sad, making them feel frustrated, right? So we can't just exclude that from what we're trying to do, right? So one thing that we do is we target fair pairs. So a fair pair is behaviors like to correct and like incorrect and correct responses. So when we're doing math fact fluency, we want correct responses and there are incorrect responses, right? So it's important to identify there are behaviors we want to decelerate and decrease. What's the behavior and inner behavior we want to accelerate? So you may have negative thoughts, you want to increase positive thoughts. We may have anxious thoughts, we You want to have confident thoughts. You may have angry thoughts. Might want to have problem-solving thoughts. How do we solve the problem that the anger is building up from, or happy? Maybe you have selfish thoughts and then you want kind thoughts, you know? How are we going to combat it? Because just because the behavior is going down, it's got to go somewhere. So what are the things that we want to accelerate and increase in the individual, right? So when we're teaching, um, now that we've just talked about fair pairs, the idea for every behavior we want to decrease, we want to identify one to increase. We want to talk about how to actually teach a student this from scratch. Think of it as a three-step sequence. First column, what you teach for first. Before a student can count their own anxious thoughts, they have to be able to tell the difference between a thought and a physical sensation. Like my stomach hurts is not a thought. Nobody likes me, that is a thought. You practice with them directly to identify what is a thought. This is especially important for our younger learners. Some of our older learners, you might be able to more easily skip this step, but I definitely want to give attention to our younger learners because this is important. Second column is once they can make those distinctions, they practice counting. You give them a counter, set a timer for a certain amount of time, and they press the button each time they notice that kind of feeling. So maybe for one class, okay, now that you're able to detect what an anxious thought is for this class, right? Take a tally or note each time you feel that feeling. You don't have to write it down. You don't have to tell me exactly what you're feeling. Let's just figure out the number of times it's happening so you're able to practice noticing. And the third column is the goal. They're able to do it on their own, no timer from you, no reminder. They recognize their own thoughts and track them independently during regular class time. The key line at the bottom is important. Each skill builds on the last. Students can't count what they can't detect. If you skip straight to count your anxious thoughts and the student can't distinguish a thought from a feeling or anything like that, the data means nothing. So we build it from the ground up, right? Um, so the teaching sequence kind of looks like this. Step one, is it a thought? This is pure detection. You read out examples like my hands are shaking, not a thought. That's a physical sensation. I'm going to embarrass myself. That's a thought. Student says thought or not thought. Once they can do that with your examples, they practice noticing their own thoughts during a 1 minute timing. And the goal is that they can do it on their own during class without you prompting them. Step two, is it anxious or confident thought? So you're distinguishing between thought types and kinds. And then step three is to build the confident alternative. This is the fair pair in action, same process, but now the student is also counting confident thoughts. You're doing that 1 minute timing. And notice the pattern. Every step follows the same structure. Teacher led, then student, then structured practice, then independent. And each step requires the one before it. So it's visualized it all together. We want to decelerate, decrease those anxious thoughts, increase those positive thoughts on the left, the behaviors we want to decrease. And the student presses a counter for each anxious thought during the class period, and they're able to really detect those. On the right is the behavior we want to increase. We have that 1 minute timing, and we even have them count this during the class to see what they want to increase and accelerate. And the key here is, and I want to really emphasize this, is that we're not trying to completely eliminate anxiety because it does have a purpose. It does have a function, but and it's not realistic. What we're trying to do is build a competing repertoire of confident thoughts. As the confidence goes up, the anxiety count typically goes down, and we know that because we're measuring both under the same conditions every day. And make sure you look at that bottom bar. Both behaviors are counted the same way and the same time during the same classroom with the same students. So when you see the numbers shift, you know it's real. You don't have to guess whether the intervention is working. The data will tell you. And this comes directly from my published research and my dissertation at Penn State. So there's an empirical basis behind this and all the articles that we saw, not just a nice idea. It's been tested with middle school students experiencing anxiety. So that's my presentation. If you want to contact me or go to my Instagram or TikTok, LinkedIn, website, what have you, I have all of those there.